Good afternoon. It wasn't all me that did the 2.2 billion, but I'll take it. So I feel slightly offended by Tim's presentation. Quite a good act to follow, actually. He was a good presenter. But he talked about the rise of the idiot, and then I stand up. It was, I maybe shouldn't take these things too personally, Tim. So, at an event called The Future of Cybersecurity, some of you may not be totally enthralled by the title of this presentation, Bots. Really? This isn't the 1990s. Bots have been around for a long time. Surely there are more innovative, more emerging threats to talk about. Well, I'll beg to differ, because what's happened in the last 18 to 24 months is that bots have absolutely become significantly more sophisticated. The threat they pose now has to be taken more seriously, and all of you in the room have to consciously decide what you're going to do about it. So, it was actually 2016 when automated traffic or bot traffic overtook humans as the largest percentage of the internet, and that gap keeps widening now. There are of course, good bots on the internet, websites, spiders or search engine spiders and so on, but increasingly bad bots or automated traffic with malicious intent is taking a much, much bigger percentage. And you can see on the bottom right just exactly what, or the scale with which they're carrying out their activities. Wrong way. The obligatory breach slide. No cyber presentation is complete without one. I will spare you from dissecting each of these breaches, but I wanted to say one thing about this, which is all of these breaches and the breaches that have occurred before them are now very much your problem. Very much your problem and your company's problem. Allow me to explain. So, if we take an example of me. So, I am a Marriott Hotels Starwood Alliance customer. I have an account with them. I have a Twitter account. On the top left, I have a Facebook account. Below Marriott, I have an Instagram account. I have a MyFitnessPal account, although I admittedly don't log into that one as often as my wife would like me to. But how do I access all of these accounts? Exactly the same way, a standard username and password. None of these accounts have enforced two-factor authentication. They can't. Frictionless customer interaction is everything. And so it's a standard username, which tends to be my private email address, and a password. And because I work in security, it's a strong password. But whether it's strong or weak doesn't matter, because it's been stolen, along with the matching username. So as I said, this is very much now my problem, or our problem, because I might not be alone. I'm actually embarrassed to admit this in front of a room full of security professionals, but I use that same username and password on about 50 other private website or applications, okay? So it is very much my problem. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, because you're all security professionals. You all use personal password managers in your private life, so this isn't a problem for you. It's great. There's a few nervous smiles or glances. But I can tell you now, in Q1 of 2019, I will adopt this in my private life, because what I see in my current line of work genuinely gives me rise for caution. Previous to this role, I did serve on the board of CyberArk for 6 years, so I absolutely understand the importance of vaulting credentials, rotating passwords, protecting critical credentials, but it hasn't filtered into my private life. So I'm very vulnerable, as are a number of you who haven't done the same thing. But if we use password managers, let's be honest, 99+% of the population won't. And they will rely on your organization to not release or have stolen their personal PII data. So that's why these breaches are very much your company's problem. Makes sense, I hope. Just last week, Troy Hunter, who many of you may be aware of his work, if not, I'd recommend you have a look at his website. It's quite eye-opening. He said last week that he had discovered 770 million email and passwords on hacking forums. 770 million. I think mine are probably in that number, unfortunately for me. He also said that 140 million were brand new to him. He and his company hadn't seen this before. which suggests that the problem's just getting worse and that many extra credentials are spilling onto the market from some of the breaches I just showed at the end of last year. This is getting worse, basically. I think if you look at the basic laws of supply and demand, if supply is high, and 770 million is quite a high number, then prices are going to come down. And the ease of obtaining stolen credentials, the cost is now so low and so easy, this is now a mainstream attack. Because once you couple the ease of obtaining the credentials with getting a bot to actually go and do it at scale for you, it becomes absolutely mainstream. And the ease of downloading bots or off-the-shelf tools to do this, to act as the vehicle of attack, things like Storm or Sentry MBA, there's just a whole plethora of them are available. It doesn't require deep technical skills to launch these attacks. So this is not the domain of the few highly skilled anymore. This type of attack is called credential stuffing. Okay, Troy mentions it on the top of that slide. This isn't a term that he's coined, it's an industry term. It's been around for a while, but if you haven't consciously thought about your company's approach to how to stop it, then now is the time to do it, because it's become rife. There are some third parties talking about it. In truth, not enough. And I fully expect 2019 to be almost all the third-party analysts and advisors that we come to rely on in this space. I think there'll be just a huge amount more said about credential stuffing and the rise of sophisticated bot attacks and what they're doing. And of course, the recommendations that go with it. Without dwelling on this slide for too long, there's been a real evolution of bots. I mentioned they've been around for ages, they have. And it started off very much as basic bot usage. And as I said already, the use of these off-the-shelf tools really gave rise to this automated account takeover, automated bot activity. One of the big pivotal points, though, was when the bot writers really started trying to mimic true human behavior. They're called imitation attacks by many. This is absolutely happening right now, and many of the companies stopped it by looking for things like, does it have a mouse trail? A bot won't use a mouse, a human will, so we'll stop. We'll look for mouse trails. The bots are way ahead of it. They'll just artificially insert human-like mouse trails so that they don't get detected, and they'll just keep retooling like this all the time. They are undiscernible from humans in many cases. The real concern, though, is this is like a timeline on the far side of this, which is they now have the ability to adapt in real time. They are definitely harnessing the power of AI as an attacker. And what we find is that they retool in real time. So the minute you block them, they just mutate, retool, and come back again. More and more aggressive every time. So how on earth do you stop this? I'm going to get to that. But before I do, I'd like to talk about some of the intent behind what the bots are doing, which this slide, by the way, does no justice to the intent behind the bot writers. There's no slide big enough. But it does capture some of what they're trying to do. At this point, I was actually going to talk about some e-commerce use cases that we see, because it's a rife thing in e-commerce. But I had a very good conversation over lunch with a gambling gaming company. It just reminded me, as I was going through with them, all the different use cases that gaming and gambling face. And what we see is we'd see different bot attacks across different vertical sectors, even different companies within those vertical sectors. So the intent is not always obvious. But if I drill down into gaming and gambling just for 1 second, that wasn't a bot, that was just a human. We started working with this sector about 4 years ago, and we assumed that account takeover was the big goal for the bot. Given, if you just imagine for a second that an average gambling account acts like a mini bank account, they carry a balance in there for ease of access, we assumed that bots would be trying to access those accounts. And they were. Account takeover was the primary goal of the bot. But there were measures in place within gambling companies which made it more difficult for the bot to then extract the money out of the account. There's certain regulation, as there is in banking. And so the bots, it wasn't impossible, but it was very difficult, very costly for them to do it. But what we actually saw when looking at the account takeover problem was that bots were causing all sorts of issues around the gambling community. And by the way, you can swap this analogy for any other vertical that you work in, just drilling into one. But they were doing fake account creation, which you can see up there. Why were they doing fake account creation? You've seen the adverts. You open up a new account, you get a free £20 bet. A bot can open up hundreds of accounts in seconds, place the bets, clean the accounts out, move on before you realize what's happened. It's called bonus abuse in their industry. They were scraping. I mean, odds scraping is a massive problem, and it was just incessant on every gambling website we looked at. The odds scraping was incessant. And again, you've seen that. We guaranteed to have better odds than Paddy Power or William Hill or whoever it could be. And what they do, they have no cost of actually setting the odds. They just steal the odds, they scrape them, they put them on their website, and then they advertise and redirect traffic to theirs. It's a major loss of revenue for the gambling companies. And actually the scraping was just a big issue. And if I go down to account takeover, even if they can't take money out of the account because of certain controls, they can place fraudulent bets. If you have control of enough accounts, you can make bets and start to move markets. You can start to change odds in your or somebody else's favor. So you can see the intent isn't always as obvious as you might think. This is just one industry. The other side we saw was that they were having to serve up so much infrastructure, so much cloud-based infrastructure, which wasn't cheap, to cope with the bot traffic. They were having to spend money on infrastructure for traffic they didn't even want, and the costs were not insignificant. I mean, this is a cyber security place, a cyber event, but actually some of our customers have justified expenditure just on cost savings of infrastructure alone. And finally, it's up there, skewed analytics. The marketing departments at the gambling companies and across many other verticals have had a major problem. If you think about gambling, and I had this conversation at lunch, which is why I reminded to change my anecdote here, is that in gambling, there is very little loyalty and differentiation sometimes. The odds are typically similar, and so they rely on exceptional marketing to differentiate. The marketing department look at the website, they take their analytics from the website, and they spend literally millions of pounds based on that data. Data that is skewed because bots, they can't determine what is bots and humans. So huge investment that is being skewed by bot activity. I got the orange card. So there are 5 steps to account takeover, which because of time, I'm not going to step through. Okay, you can read them for yourselves. But this is the ultimate goal of any bot, and this is the biggest problem you must have an answer against. How do you stop your customer accounts from being taken over? Interestingly, the stat at the bottom, or the quote at the bottom from the register, it's actually not fully complete. It should read 9 out of 10 login attempts on e-commerce sites are not human, and that absolutely marries up with what we see from our own customer experience. E-commerce is being hammered. So every time you log into your supermarket loyalty card, there are 9 attempts from a bot to try and do the same, to try and spend those points. But this is not an e-commerce problem. Every vertical is having the same problem, but e-commerce is being hit particularly hard right now. So why aren't organizations stopping them? Well, first of all, they assume it's a DDoS attack, and I'm not going to pick on him, but someone at lunch said to me, "Isn't this just a DDoS thing?" And I unpolitely laughed at his face, and I didn't mean to. It was just funny because it's exactly what people think. People think this is a DDoS attack, and he could be forgiven because it does have many characteristics when the attack first manifests itself. But, so what do? They approach their DDoS vendors. So they're typically a web application firewall vendor like an F5 or Imperva, or a content delivery network vendor like Akamai or Cloudflare. Okay, and they approach them, and they realize it's not DDoS. But don't worry, we have a bot management plugin that will solve the problem. It doesn't. Okay, it goes some way to solving it. It will solve some of those first generation problems. So it will show you dashboards of how many bots they've stopped. But please don't be fooled. It is not stopping anywhere near like this, the more sophisticated attack. In fact, it was just last month, Forrester, who actually quite advanced in this space, Forrester said that in their opinion, 100% of WAF and CDN vendors are failing to address the real threat behind bots. Interesting. So once people have worked out that the usual capture or IP whitelisting or rules-based approach is failing, they turn to dedicated bot management vendors. And there's a handful of good ones to choose from out there. But they all have one thing in common. They have a massive over-reliance on JavaScript and fingerprinting, which is in the middle at the top here. And many of you will know that your company just doesn't even allow third-party JavaScript on your site. Or if it does, others of you will know that JavaScript, no matter how well obfuscated it is by the vendor, can be cached, it can be reverse engineered, and bots can eventually find a way of getting around it. And that's what we see in the real world. We see these solutions have great impact in the first few months. They POC very well. And then once the bots learn how to get around it, it gets less and less effective. They will say that the bots just went away. They realized they couldn't get in. No, the bots found a ways in and your report didn't find it. So we have a very different approach. This is my last slide. I'm being red carded. We have a very different approach, which is a completely different mindset to the problem, okay? Which is based around machine learning. I think, just to be clear, we have exactly the same controls that I've just mentioned. We use fund capture, we use IP whitelisting, we use JavaScript if you'll allow us to put it on the site. But at the heart of what we do has always been machine learning and behavioral analysis. We have a team based here in Manchester of about 40 people based on Deansgate. And what they do is they allow us to test features of data sets, thousands of features on data sets, as opposed to the hundreds that JavaScript and other techniques have allowed us. This gives unparalleled accuracy in real time at looking at the problem. The last thing I'll say is we have general purpose models and algorithms that are different across different verticals and can be customized based on different customers' risk appetite levels. And that's some of the conversations we had over lunch. So I'd planned to do a real world example, but if you'd like to hear about it, we're upstairs and we'd love to tell you more about it. But this is a very real problem that you have to have a conscious choice around. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you.